Okay here with a final 2021 Crazyhouse stream, just catching up some of the last games in the candidates that didn't get live coverage. Those games which weren't covered live were Bugzilla against VariantsOnly, Bugzilla against opperwezen, with opperwezen giving some of the commentary I will share with you, mariorton against doganswer, and mariorton against Catask. So that's some of the stuff I just want to quickly share with you over the next hour or more. Okay, so welcome everyone. Let's begin with Bugzilla against VariantsOnly. Bugzilla plays e4, and he does not take that knight. That would give open bishops for black and a pleasant position. And we have knight c5 here. It's a very strange move, and what it reminded me of is an old game between JK the Bullfrog as white and Rapid Variants as black, where Rapid Variants came up with this very creative idea of just d6 and let white simply take the knight. For example, e6 was one of the creative responses JK the Bullfrog came up with, because I'm going to turn the engine on, because if you simply take here, then there was takes here and this is coming, but d5 seems fine. But okay, if you do the obvious thing, which is you take the knight, then takes here, push, because you don't want to trade queens necessarily, and surprisingly this is actually a good position for black. Gets a lot of development. He gets a sort of a weakness on f2. JK the Bullfrog and Rapid Variants had a bunch of really interesting games along the... Another one was just taking back the pawn like this, but then of course black is quite happy. So there's a whole sequence of games. I should just share the study link that I'm working from, because I'm not going to go into all of the lines. This is just okay, so d6, very creative, actually pretty nice idea here. d6, if you take the knight, takes here, black is actually doing okay. So in a similar vein, VariantsOnly goes for knight to c5. Looks like it's giving up a whole piece, but looks can be slightly deceiving. This position is actually quite complicated. The engine might say white's doing very well, and maybe white is doing very well, but the pawn structure is very messy, and basically black's still got good chances until this move here, g5. That weakens up the dark squares too much, and now white is probably in control. He's hitting f6, black defending at all costs. Bishop d4, brilliant move, just really just kicking away the defender. And now white has control of these dark squares. The rook under fire, g7, f6. And it was a very nice move there from Bugzilla. Going to pick up the rook with check, and the game is going to be soon over. Checkmate in the corner. So that was game one. Bugzilla takes it. Game two, as I said, no one streamed this live, so this is interesting just to see what happened in these games. For those, there was no one covering them, there was no recap video, so this is the recap video of these games. Knight g5, so it looks like it's an e4, e5, classical ideas. Bishop e3, so that's unusual, is it? No, apparently it's quite perfectly usual. Bishop e3, queen e8, takes that knight, and putting pressure on c7. Queen takes b5. So Bugzilla apparently is playing what is considered theory here. You're deflecting the bishop from this dangerous diagonal at the cost of a queen for a piece. This is very deeply theoretical from both players. Of course, the point here is you're threatening queen at h8 checkmate, and when you take it, queen takes bishop, and this knight cannot take back that queen because queen h7 is checkmate. So this is, as I said, a highly theoretical line, although queen takes g6 is maybe more often played, but who says? Who knows what the right move is? Queen takes g6 has been played before in a game between CIW as white and Blitzbullet, and Blitzbullet managed to win as black. You get a sort of position like this. Queen here, the queen gets attacked, and then this sort of situation. It's very unclear actually who's winning. Rook here, takes, rook here. Maybe it's a draw, maybe, but white has to be careful. White can't just white can't play passively. It's a very unclear position. The engine might say +4, but it's still very unclear. But okay, variance only goes instead for queen takes h7, and Bugzilla defends and soon launches his own counterattack, and you can see why this suddenly, it's a nice move, threatening mate and threatening a piece. Okay. F4 just takes the rook. Threatening knight takes knight check, so it has to be taken back. Takes back, knight takes. Probably a nice move here is just rook here check, pick up the knight. But knight g4 was played. Bishop at g1, nice defensive resource. But how long can you continue? So rook at h2 apparently was the move here to deflect king g1, then queen takes. The threat being take the knight, and what's the threat here? If you do nothing, the threat is rook at h1, knight takes, then yeah, it's not clear exactly what the threat is. But queen takes knight and rook at h1. Yeah, surely queen takes knight and rook h1 would be mating if you do nothing. So just takes, rook at h1. Yes, exactly. King e3, king takes knight, and this is checkmate. So that's the threat. So instead this, pawn here, and knight here is checkmate. Bishop covering the escape. So rook at h2 would have been a slightly more forcing mate, but instead goes for this, which is clearly good as well. And now forcing king takes, knight here check, pawn here, takes, all coming with checks. Queen takes g3. Okay, so this is a crush from Bugzilla, and black wins. Okay, so 2 games up. Game 3 is going to be a Scandi from VariantsOnly. And you have the traditional 3 knights of the apocalypse bearing down on you here. So it's a perfectly decent position from black. Knight c6 comes, bishop d3 takes on d2, and bishop at f4. Yeah, the bishop at f4 raises a question, why not just simply bishop at h6? And the reason, so this has been played before in a game between 12-teen as white and opperwezen as black, and 12-teen just sidestepped, and bishop at h6 is actually decent if you're just going to sidestep, because then you can attack the queen, just develop normally, and the queen is very passive, and black gets a nice position. But the reason why bishop at h6 isn't strong is because you can actually take this bishop, takes back, and just back off. Rook g8 could come, but then simply bishop at c5, and you want to undermine the defender of f6, and or else you win a knight for g7. So either way, you're in good shape. So that's why backing up bishop at f4 was played, and then backing off to h6. Bishop d3, And here black should probably just castle, but instead went for bishop d7. Again, white has a nice resource here. Knight at f5, hit this bishop, and the e pawn is pinned. But white simply castled himself. Queen e7. And black chose to castle queenside rather than kingside, which is rather risky, obviously, with the bishop and queen bearing down on a6. And the pawn now is launching towards a6, and even gets there. He doesn't want to trade along those light squares, so he goes b6, but this is obviously creating a permanent weakness on b7. Black going for his own counter-attack, bishop at b7, and h3 comes. Okay, so now bishop e4 was played, hoping for knight at c6 next, but there was a stronger move here. Knight at d7 directly picks up a rook, and the reason that is powerful is because you have enough pieces to continue this attack. So knight here, knight takes. Oh, you have to be careful. Okay, so you can't just go takes here, because otherwise you're getting almost mated. Knight at f3 check, takes back, h takes g2. Threatening mate, you can simply defend, but then knight at f4, and there are a lot of threats. Knight takes rook, simply queen in the corner, getting another knight as well. So for example, if you just put a pawn here, queen at h1 takes, knight then take the rook, and this is checkmate straight away. The knight and bishop, knight covering the dark squares, bishop covering the light squares. If you move the rook aside, simply actually the extra knight is enough to mate. So what can you do? Difficult to see how to defend. So this is why, yeah, you don't take knight takes e5 straight away, but white is actually in good shape here. He just has to find this very impressive move. Rook at a8 check, bishop at b7 check, and then takes, and the bishop is now providing backward coverage. And now this, anything like this, you can just take and you're actually safe, run away, and white is winning. So knight at d7 was strong, but had to play it fairly precisely with this knight here, and then rook at a8 before taking back. But okay, bishop at e4 was played directly. Bishop back to e4 rather. And this is a sharp position. But white maintains control of this key diagonal, and so ended up winning. So bishop at e4, probably black's opportunity for defending was just simply bishop at c6, and then if you take it, you no longer have knight at c6, so now you can continue your attack. That would be the approach. Okay, so after 3 games, Bugzilla has won all 3 games, and this is the point when VariantsOnly pulls out his trump card, the rover, the rook over, playing a4 as white. Oh, thanks Kusan Nishanov for the follow. And where's he going to put his rook? He's got many choices. You could put it here or here. So the idea of this position is it makes it harder for black to develop this bishop. The idea of this position is you think you're considering sacks on f7, and you're just making something of this piece in the corner, which would otherwise might lie dormant the whole game. So never underestimate the rover, even though Stuckfish might say black is completely winning. Okay, the rook is pushed to f3. And, well, the rook is being pushed off the board. And Bugzilla with a very creative attack, just launching at White's king. And just simply defends with that rook, and looks like he's in complete control. Throws in a check. I mean, the point is, if you were to take, then you can just seal that queen in, as it were. And many ways of doing that. You could also go check and then seal it in. So, and if king takes, then likewise, big trouble. So this rook here, check. He wants to win the queen with check, and that's going to be curtains. At h2 promotes. Just too much, yeah, too much. So Bugzilla takes the first 4 games. Game 5. VariantsOnly couldn't have been happy at this point, and he goes for another tilt opening, as it were, the Sicilian, which people shouldn't really play in Crazyhouse because it's not that great, because it creates a big weakness on c7. But top players can sometimes play it okay. This is a strange move, you'd think. Why not just take here? But Black's got some development issues. His bishops are both blocked up. So this is clearly not good. This way at least Black gets a pawn and gets one of his bishops open. But this isn't good either. Queen c7. White has a big material advantage, just go straight for the sack. And we're going to see a very classic attack on an open king. At h5 check, knight takes h5, bishop d3 check, bringing another piece into the attack, f5. And in this position, actually Bugzilla has a forced mate with the queen sack, but didn't go for it. King takes h5, maybe slightly hard to see. At g4, the idea is if you take g4, you've opened up the bishop's control of g6, and then you can go knight at g3, and of course if you ever go to h6, this is a double check with checkmate from the bishop and the knight at once. So you have to go here, but then choices, lots of choices. Do you put a knight on f5? Maybe that works, but then this knight would come here and then the king would step back here. So actually the thing to do is bring this knight back to here, or this knight back to here. You have to take back. Notice 2 knights together cover up, make a wall, so the king's only got 1 square to go to, and this is checkmate because the bishop covers the square. So I gave the line in the other direction in the study. So that's why you can't take with the pawn. And if you take with, obviously you can't, if you step back, you have this double check, king here, takes the rook, another knight drops, and the rook lands, and this is a sort of classic situation where the rook looks like it's hanging, but the bishop is coming in with check to protect it. So that won't work either. And finally, why not just take with the king? And that doesn't work because of bishop e2, cutting off the king's escape running back. So it has only got 1 square to go to, h4, and simply g3 is checkmate. So the queen sack directly, followed by at g4 was very nice, but instead Bugzilla just played a crushing move, just sealing that king off, sacrificing his queen, and then this is checkmate. Notice this sacrifice is deflecting the knight from a defensive g4, so this is checkmate. So 5-0 after 5 games. What's VariantsOnly going to do in game 6? Back to d4. The tilt opening didn't work, and we've got a very classical kind of setup. And actually White's winning a pawn. So White's doing very well indeed. Did White miss something here? probably did. So probably a move like g5 and then knight f6 was necessary. So white simply picks up a pawn and puts that pawn on e5. So it's making good progress. Now this is a tricky little move. Obviously you can't take it with the queen, because otherwise knight takes g2 picks up the queen. You could take it with the knight. And what's the idea? So the idea of this move is then this, and either knight takes or queen takes. And if ever this, the problem is d2 is very weak. So castles to try and shore up d2, castles queenside to shore up d2 back. a6 would be the crushing move from white, and white would be winning. But an interesting idea. And so, but knight takes is perfectly fine. And pawn takes is another interesting idea. Then you lose the pawn on d4. And still white is doing completely fine, but that's the idea of this move. And then castles get the king safe. So the idea of this move is just to try and either have this idea breaking down white center, or this idea. Or if a weaker player might fall for queen takes f4. So it's a sort of destabilizing move in a position where black is completely losing. Knight takes c7, king sidesteps, and he takes with the pawn, and we see again knight takes pawn. Bishop here wins back the knight, and yeah, white is doing very well indeed, not being destabilized. He loses his queen, however, but the problem is bishop takes f7 was probably a threat that he could not ignore. If he did, say, a move like this to try and destabilize the knight and take on d4, the problem is bishop takes f7 straight away, and knight at d6, for example, or knight to d6, knight at d6 apparently, is very good. So these sorts of ideas. Here, king h7 at f6, and white is all over black's position. So black has to defend. And we see an attempt to defend, but bishop takes f7 immediately might have been stronger, but this is just very strong regardless. So VariantsOnly gets his first win with d4 as white. So what are we going to see here? Another one of these, but this time this encourages taking here because it's not opening up any bishops. Doubled f pawns are actually not so good in general, so white is looking actually quite comfortable. Okay, so decides to give up a piece for 2 pawns, which is fair trade in Crazyhouse. This, we have 2 pieces bearing down on this square here. c3 actually seems safe enough because c2 doesn't seem like a problem. Apparently this is a mistake because rook takes h5. So why can't I take back? I can't take back because of knight at d3. Or maybe I can, but it's complicated. So with the problem is this and this. But even just takes, and f3 is f3 the weakness, or is it c2 the weakness? White's position suddenly not looking so nice. So yeah, rook takes h5, not something I'd considered earlier. And so for that reason, probably taking this bishop was stronger. And the queen is kind of almost trapped, is trapped back on h7. And you can clearly see this is completely crushing for white. You could even just castle and continue the game. But knight d2 was played. Knight f3, okay, the queen was lost anyway. And very strong play from Bugzilla. He's capturing a pawn to put on a6. But nice counterplay from VariantsOnly, trying to get a rook for the back rank. The pawn lands on a6, and the pain comes. Now, in fact, there was actually a direct mate. Instead of at a6, there was a direct mate with queen takes knight and a smothered mate. But at a6 just simply, with black having only pawns in hand, forces the instant resignation. So it's a matter of style, which one you prefer. So 6-1 after 7 games. VariantsOnly continuing what worked for him last game, d4. And Bugzilla playing a wolf defense. Quite a passive setup. And white obviously controls the center. Maybe this is something where white could have won even quicker, with bishop at g6, going straight for a light square attack. And it's very difficult to see what to do, because if you try and defend, takes, bishop at g6 again, just back off the queen, and you have beautiful position. If you try and take that, then you really are in trouble. You can't take, the point is, with this, because this is checkmate. So you have to take with the queen and give up your queen. So this is crashing. So bishop at g6 was the move, but instead this came. And knight at h5. Actually a mistake from white, because e2, he's encouraging knight takes knight, knight takes knight, and e2 is left weak. So he's allowing his knight to be deflected. So this is actually a problem, and black takes control of this position now. Knight at e2 takes g3. If black had done queen at e2 here, for example, threatening queen takes rook and queen takes g2 check, allows knight takes g7, but just says there's no mate. Then knight takes g7, king here. Notice we can just take back. There's no mate here. Rook g1 is a nice try, but we just go rook at f1, and there's no way to stop the mate. If you just do this, just takes bishop takes, queen takes g2, checkmate, for example. So queen at e2 is, instead he defended. He didn't need to defend because f7 was protected. He could have just gone straight for the attack. And here black makes a really bad blunder by going rook h7. It seems harmless, after all the promotion square is covered, but it uncovers f8. Simply rook g8 would work. So we'll see what happens with after rook h7. White actually has mate here with knight at f6, and the point is you can't take here because if takes. If queen takes, you've now got a rook in hand, and the queen is blocking off the f6 square. Well, it doesn't matter, the queen's blocking off the f6 square. This is checkmate. And you can't go king here either, because then just simply throw away the knight. If you go king back, rook here is checkmate. If you take with the queen, bishop here and rook here is checkmate. So knight, bishop and rook, just throw away the knight and bishop and rook mates. Sorry. So what do you do in this position? King e7 is what happened in the game, and bishop at f8 as VariantsOnly played. black ran out of time and there's nothing he can do. If he takes, queen here's checkmate. So that all came from undefending f8, because in this position, if now this takes, there's no rook at f8 because the rook's covering f8. You can take the queen, but then you get mated. Check, knight here, check, pawn here, check, knight here, check, and there's a checkmate. So VariantsOnly picks up a second game, 6 games to 2 after 8 games. Okay, game 9. So it's a check. So he seems to have picked up a pawn, but black's got a very open king and needs to develop fast. Open queen, I meant. Pawn at c6. So he was concerned, how would I defend against, for example, knight here, for example. Seems like black's got what he wants in terms of open bishops, though. So, not such a bad position. Just needs to find something to do with his queen. And h3 takes. So why can't white just take back? What's the problem? Queen takes c4. Yeah. Oops. That's the problem. So takes here, takes here, takes here. And black launches straight into a counterattack. But this queen, you can see, is swinging straight into the action if you take that pawn. Queen b4 comes anyway. And he's threatening both promotion and taking the knight. So you can see how black's really taken control of this game. Knight b1, nice defense. Knight here, check. Knight takes c3, and black took back, but actually a really nice move was just queening. Takes, and knight at c3 picking up the queen. But completely winning from black. But this is also good. Taking here, taking the bishop, and getting that knight on c3. Decides not to take the queen, decides just to go for some discoveries. Got to be careful. White only has 1 pawn in hand, so maybe it's just about okay. It's just about okay so long as you play king f8. There's no mate. By playing king to d8, now there's a mate. With simply queen at c8, takes, king takes, forced. You stop the king from running away, and we don't have a second pawn, but we can make a second pawn. And now you're finished. And you don't even need to go rook takes, bishop, rook takes. You simply just go knight here, checkmate. So, but if you didn't have the knight there, checkmate, you have rook takes, bishop, rook takes, checkmate. And all of that trouble came because he allowed his king to be drawn over to this side and sealed off. Whereas if he simply moved here, there's no similar thing. So here, takes, king takes, and there's no check for a king on e8. There's no way of picking up another pawn. So he went here, but Bugzilla put the queen on the wrong square, and he's able to run. He tries to seal him off, but he doesn't have any checks to win an extra pawn. And so VariantsOnly wins after all, with a very nice just mate in 2. So a very topsy-turvy game 9 brought VariantsOnly up to 3 games against Bugzilla 6. And looking at game 10, d4 had worked. Why not do this again? Except this time Bugzilla doesn't lose the pawn on d5. So Bugzilla gets a much more pleasant position than last time as black. Bishop at e8 though, Stockfish is not impressed by it, wants to go straight into the attack with bishop at h3. Bishop d8 gives white a lot more initiative. A4 is such a weird move. What's the idea? Very slow play from both players. It's like struggling to find constructive moves. And if white is struggling to find constructive moves, then black is doing well. It's just moving his queen up and down. Queen e1, bishop at f4. At f3 was played by black, but the queen is under attack, and the queen can do something constructive to simply take this pawn. Unfortunately, this allows... It still looks decent for black, but white has a queen in hand, and interesting things start happening. Knight at h6. So the point is, you can't just take this knight, because otherwise knight at f6, threatening queen at h7, checkmate. And there's not quite... Yeah, so queen takes rook, and it's just very hard to... You can just take all the defenders and eventually seal that king up with a checkmate. So bishop takes h6 is not available, but you can just sidestep, as Bugzilla did. But knight takes bishop, bishop here check, and this is a really crazy position. It's not clear who's winning. Gives up his queen. Seems like white is back in control. Knight at h7, and so knight at h7, yeah, knight at h7 is still, he's still got mate on the cards with bishop at f6, queen at e7, and a knight to mate. So VariantsOnly wins another really difficult game, and with that, he won 4 games of the 10 against Bugzilla. So really wonderful comeback, having lost the first 5 to manage 4-10. Okay, so I'm going to pause here, and when we're back, we're going to be looking at opperwezen against Bugzilla. Okay, so the next match we're going to cover is opperwezen against Bugzilla from opperwezen's perspective. And some of the annotations are actually from Opper himself, but they have been engine checked. So in just rare instances where Opper miscalculated the lines, I can actually tell you some things he missed as well. So it's quite interesting. So he says here, e4. Bugzilla played 5 matches in a row. I expect he would prep too much or just not prep while you've got to finish so many matches in 1 week. I played e4, but it's getting sharp and I was getting out of book early, and I find it more pleasant to play something more calm later with 1 d4. So he started with 1 e4 and then tried d4 later. So he goes for theory. Knight g5, d5, takes knight a5. I'd say Bugzilla is someone who is very well prepared. d3 takes, bishop at h5, takes. So just to say here, you can't really take this knight. If you take this knight, you're basically getting mated because of this check. And never been played before on Lee chess. It's always been bishop here check, and then block. You have to block them. I mean, you have to defend against the mate and maybe take the knight if you feel like it. But bishop at d5 is even stronger. Because the natural move king e7 is actually mated straight away with this check, and this checkmate. Here, well, checkmate in 2. So actually the best defense is actually going here and trying to kind of dance around a little bit, but you're still completely lost and you're losing your queen. So king takes f7 is out of the question. Black has still got some play with bishop here check, blocks, and opper says I was clearly out of book, but I knew that knight takes f7 was a line and bishop b4 is logical, but I don't know the value of this line, but I think white should do well in this line. And he's right. It's and yet both players actually are playing the best move in this position. Check, threatening 2 pawns at once, but knight t3 defends both pawns, and it's the best move. Knight f4 is exactly the best continuation, and bishop f3 is also opper's playing exactly the right move to defend g2. He correctly realized if I go hunting that queen, this check comes, I might sidestep my king, takes, queen g2, defends, knight t4 check, he calculated, and he realized in this position black has at least a draw. You never want to come back to the first rank because otherwise queen takes rook is coming with check. So opper saw the draw and said, no, I don't want to play this line. What opper did not see, which is not necessarily so easy to see, is this check, no, not that check. I mean, that check also works, but at here check. Bringing the queen back, and this is coming next with checkmate. If you block, so you better run back, but then this is checkmate. That's a kind of hard move to find because it's so tempting in this position to do a double check. But the double check, is the double check going anywhere? It's not so clear. Bishop f5 check. It's a rather complicated position. They're still mate, but it's queen takes e4, king d2. Oh yeah, there'll be a mate eventually. At e3, king d1. Do I take the rook? Or do I take the pawn? Both are very nice, but takes. Okay, so this is going obviously way too much into things. It's just clearly completely lost. Oh yes, bishop here check is the way to kill things clearly. King f1. Okay, this isn't the cleanest mate, but I like it the most, which is this, and then this, and this. But actually there's a cleaner mate, which is just draw him up, and then finish the job. Okay, so even the double check also mates, but the really neat mate is queen here check with bishop here check coming next, so he has to run back to avoid it. Okay, so the point is you can't take the queen. That was the opper correctly calculated the main point of this whole thing. You do not take the queen, you have to defend. Bishop at f3 plays the best move. Both players playing very high quality. And then takes the knight. At e6, you can see how both players are still playing the top engine moves. So it's very impressive play from both players. Bishop takes e6, c takes b4. It's literally just both players as if they're like just playing top moves. Again and again and again. And opper was considering why not queen at h5 and then knight here check. The problem is this would come. So that doesn't work at all. And you can't take this pawn here for exactly the same reason. Knight takes f3 is coming, picking up the queen. So that's why he has to defend f3. There's no time for any intermezzo checks. And Opper was very impressed by this move by Bugzilla, challenging that bishop, because that bishop is a monster defender. It's defending both c2 and f3. So challenging the bishop on e4, because there's one defender defending both pieces, really wonderful move. So he takes and replaces at f5. Really, this is a superb first game from both players. Amazing. Bishop takes b7, so he's had to give up defending c2, but at least the knight is covering c2 for now. At g2, nice move. Says Opper, I can't take it because if you take it, knight takes c2 is mating, basically. If you go here, bishop takes pawn check is coming, and the king can't run, and the queen is coming next with checkmate. And if you just go all the way here, I'm thinking the queen could come directly down to here. And okay, so it's not all checks mate, but knight takes knight is threatening. Knight takes pawn, double checkmate, and there's basically no defense. So he can't take it. And if he goes rook g1, the problem is rook takes h2. Okay, luckily for Opper, Bugzilla doesn't play rook takes h2 and instead tries to block this defense of the bishop on f3. But the reason why this isn't a good move, neither player actually notices, which is that you can take it. Takes, and now suddenly the knight is not creating all these threats, it's being deflected back. And you now got a counter threat on e6, and white is doing really well. Neither player noticed that. So rook takes h2 was the move. Instead, queen at d1, just to defend everything from Opper. Bishop at e2 came. Queen takes, knight takes, king takes. What was I thinking? So he was thinking of at e2 as well, but the same problem. Rook takes h. So that's why he puts the queen on to be more solid. Takes, takes, takes. Takes. And here, yeah, Opper says, good game played by Bugzilla, but here Bugzilla goes wrong. Because he should have played, okay, queen at f1 is correct, takes, 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 everything is fine so far, queen d1 blocks, the key move is at e2. At e2, pushing the king aside, rook here, just drawing the king down so you get the queen in with check, and there's no defense. Bishop here is checkmate. Instead, Bugzilla plays rook here, check, takes. Takes is a mistake. You still need at e2 and takes. Draw the king down, bring the queen in, and the same checkmate. So draw the king in, takes, 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 queen here, and bishop here, checkmate. So that was a very important sequence. Rook takes, actually, black doesn't have enough to mate here with pawn, bishop. He just has to give up the queen, but doesn't have anything. Takes, yeah, white's just fine. There's nothing, there is nothing. Bishop's covering any checks. Black's just defending, but there's nothing. White just simply takes up. And Opper finishes off in style. Queen at f6, if you take it, queen at g7 is mate. So he tries to block, protect with the rook. This is a nice little move. So if you take with the rook, queen takes g7 is mate. If you take with the pawn, that's what happened in the game. Then deflect the rook. queen g7 is mate. So a very stylish finish from Opper. How many players would find this kind of finish? Queen at f6. And of course, if you do this, you have to block. Oh, his queen here is checkmate. If you do this, then there is queen at h5 and pawn here, checkmate. So you block, and then queen takes pawn is mate next. So you have to block, but then simply knight at g5. So the king is in a mating net. You can try and run, but you have then the classic mate. And even if the king could run, this would be mate. So very stylish finish from Opper with the queen at f6, queen at h6, and delivers the mate. So that was game 1. Opper takes it. Game 2. Opper says he wants to surprise his opponent, so he goes for knight to e4. It's perfectly playable. And then d6. Takes, knight c3. And he was saying if queen e2, queen e7, this is still an equal position, no problems. So knight c3. Maybe the move they both missed is here is d5, and I'd say this is an equal position. But instead, takes here, and suddenly queen e2 is a problem. He only realizes this now, because now queen e2, queen e7, knight here is a bit of a problem. You can try and do this, but then white could simply just take back. Or the more complicated line is takes with check, king d8. White could take the rook, let you take the queen, throw in the check here, and this is actually very good for white. He probably has to give back the queen here. Queen takes c7, knight takes c7. The white king is safe. So queen e2, scary move that Opper saw, but Bugzilla played queen d3, and so Opper sighed a sigh of relief. Now I was satisfied. I think this is not the ideal square for the queen. Indeed, the queen can be hit with tempo with pawns here or here. So knight f3 was played. Kicks that knight. Now I've got another knight in hand, and one nice idea is actually knight at g4, take here and put a pawn here. But Opper goes directly for this idea and ends up picking up the queen for that piece. And any normal person would play bishop e7 here. But Opper was a bit concerned that in, say, a position like this, the white king is actually pretty safe on h1. So he decides to take with the queen. He decides to interpose the queen instead. So if takes, bishop takes, he's developing the bishop with tempo, and he's still got this idea of knight here, check. Hi there, Drunken Mushy. h7 is weak. In which position? Oh, in this position. Okay, so if this knight here check, simply castles. Okay, so h7. At the moment, everything's defended because you can take it once, and the g5 checks are all covered. Oh, but after this take, yes. Okay, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And once you're here, now h7 is weak. So things are castles isn't necessarily the best move here, of course, but the point here is that white is sort of developing with tempo. Obviously, if you go queen with queen e7, you can't bishop here. That doesn't work at all. because you just have knight here check, queen here. I thought queen e3 check, it says. I'm very... But anyway, the point is the king is just going to slide. So why doesn't... Oh, I see, this is very cunning. So king can't slide here directly because of this stuff. So kind of quite cunning way of picking up an extra pawn. Going queen to e3, and then slides across, and then takes. So this is, and we've got a smothered mate at the end of the line, I think. No, we don't, because the bishop is covering. Bishop is covering this, so we've got to be a little bit careful. We have to go rook at g1, king takes. So this is just like a long line y, king f1. We have another rook here, and we're gonna see this one home. Checkmate. So the point of all of that is just to show why, yeah, putting a queen here is coming with counter threats. But yeah, in the bishop e7 line, absolutely. So this queen here check. Knight at h5 says, yes. In this line, obviously, bishop takes h7 is going to be a problem, with knight at g5 coming up is what I think you meant. Yeah, absolutely. So it's probably still fine, but you just don't castle. So you just go queen f1, king h1, knight e3, for example. Threatening mate here. So blocking off this file and threatening mate. But obviously Opper was concerned about this line, and so decided to interpose with the queen. And as you'll see, this turned out to be a wise decision, because takes, white puts the queen back on the board. And again, really nice move from Opper, defending his own king. So why not just take this rook? So the problem with taking this rook is takes, and now this queen is no longer guarding f2. So if, for example, this, you have the very simple mate. So he can't take twice in this position. So he defends. He blocks the file and tries to stay safe. And again, really beautiful move from Opper, queen at h1. And he's hoping here for knight at g3 and knight g4 checkmate. Nice helpmate. But instead, bishop b2 is played. Disappointing. But as Opper says, he's got check ideas with knight g4 check, or maybe even knight d1 check, and also sometimes rook takes e3 ideas, since if ever the bishop takes on e3, the queen can take the rook. Or if the queen takes on e3, then obviously you have knight d1 and knight g5, knight g4 ideas to pick up the queen. So bishop e2 makes a lot of sense in light of all of that. Knight g4 check came, however, and the hunt is on for that king. Takes here, so gives up the queen and just claims this pawn is too dangerous and it's mating you. At f4 check, king h4, bishop e7 check, knight h5. Obviously this is the classic mate. If you go here, there's a double check mate with bishop and knight. So you want to avoid that. And you could get a mate with all checks with bishop takes knight, but this is also mating. h6, and just no way of really stopping. H takes g5, leading to checkmate. H takes g5, and g takes f4 checkmate. So that's how Opper won game 2 against Bugzilla in their candidates match. So game 3. Now, he says, as I just prepared for 5 minutes, I try not to play such theoretical systems, so he decided to stop playing e4. It seemed like the first game was very theoretical. He didn't like. Bugzilla knew what he was doing pretty well. And he says, the Jabava-London rapport line, not a main thing I think in Crazyhouse. Still has a lot of games though, since Crazyhouse is popular, a lot of players playing it, and this is played as well. The main idea is to get a safe line, so one doesn't need to study too much. So going for e3, bishop e2, h4, knight c6, h5, takes, bishop f5, h6. Well, if he gets a pawn on h6, white's usually quite happy. Bishop backs off. Now he's looking presumably for another pawn at some point for g7. So he discovered after the games that there had been some games where black had gone knight b4 in Jasugi against Catask. Rook c1, knight takes h5, rook takes h5, bishop at g6 with this double attack, both hitting this and hitting c2. So takes, and so opper writes, this is Jasugi versus Catask. I didn't know the games in those lines. I was just happy to get a pawn on h6, but for now, white is lacking a pawn to drop, and black has got some attack on c2. And even if you do drop on g7, black could fix the hole by sometimes getting rook h1 check takes h6. And we'll see this later in the game. Bishop e2 blocks. Oh yeah, takes. Pawn here, rook here, check. Yeah, this is the line. And so you get to pick up this pawn with tempo. So knight b4 was something he discovered afterwards, but instead what happened in the game was knight takes h5 directly and bishop at g6. So same sort of idea. Takes. Knight here checks, a nice move to stop all those rook h1 ideas. Bishop dropped back to g6, and opper is desperate for that pawn. Bishop at e5, well, got to take it or else you're losing the queen. And yeah, opper's quite happy. He's got, he's got f6 and h6 to eye up. The engine likes bishop at a5 apparently in this position, trying to get some counterplay on the queen side. Similar idea, bishop at b4. And how is that worse? So I'm just like, how is bishop at a5 better? Can't we still do the same things? Takes, king takes. I see, you don't have this and this is the problem. Interesting. Well, hang on, you do have a queen. Okay, we still got knight takes. Well, okay, we'll see what happens here. So takes, king takes. Yeah, hang on, the knight is pinned. What am I talking about? So I'm not quite sure why it makes such a massive difference whether the bishop is here or here, but apparently it does. Oh, that's why. Queen d4 check picks up the bishop. Okay. So very subtle. I mean, right back in this position, you're not really noticing a difference between here and here. But there is a difference. Bishop at b4. So this comes. Queen here check, and he could just pick up the bishop, but he throws in another check and then picks up the bishop with check. So he's in pretty good shape, is opper in this position. And to be honest, he could have just cashed in here, check, and add e7, picks up the queen. Oh yeah, exactly. Just pin the queen. Don't even take it. White is completely winning. Okay, opper instead backs off, defends, takes the queen, blocks, and there's a nice little idea to finish. If knight takes knight, queen takes pawn with knight at c6 mate is the threat. There is a defense. Simply knight at b8, but we lose a whole rook. So what happened in the game? what happened in the game was black resigned. So, in this position. So, really good start from opper. Three games. But Bugzilla was not finished, as we'll see. Game 4. Opper is black. You have a d4, d5 system. And here, yeah, Opper's got some really interesting comments. He says, if bishop e7, we're entering a kind of main line system. Bishop b5 check, knight d7. And the reason he's afraid of this is because knight e5, castles, and here the move is bishop takes knight. Knight takes, bishop, queen takes the knight here, queen takes, and knight at h6. And the idea is if you take the knight, knight at f6 comes picking up your queen, that's unpleasant, and if you don't take the knight, then knight d5 comes hitting the queen, and then you take the bit, you could, yes, you're hitting the queen, but you're also hitting f7. So you want to kind of go here or here, just to keep an eye on f7. But the problem with that is then you take the bishop, and then you take the pawn on d5. And this is looking actually very pleasant for white. And if you look at the Lichess database, white basically just wins all the games. 87% win rate for white in this position, even though Stockfish says it's still only a slight advantage. It's quite unpleasant to play. So Opper is trying to avoid that, and he makes the remark that you don't want to take with the knight, because then after takes, this way round, if you take with the knight first, you don't have a knight in hand yet. Because you haven't taken this knight, you don't have a knight in hand yet. Oops. Sorry, I meant the other way around, we don't have a knight in hand yet. Whereas this way round, we have a knight in hand. So, sorry, I meant this way round, we don't have a knight in hand. Let's say this correctly. If white takes with the knight first, then black gets a knight in hand and doesn't need to take that bishop. He can just go directly knight here and then take the bishop. And the point here is then if this check, sidestep, this here, sidestep, takes, we can meet that with knight takes, and we don't weaken our structure. So a very kind of subtle point of white not wanting to give that knight too early. So if you take with the bishop first, notice that knight is still hanging here. We haven't got the knight yet to put on h4. So that we're just, so now this works because there's no time for us to go knight at h4. So quite a subtle little observation from Opper, why he didn't want to go bishop e7 directly, so he goes knight b to d7. Trying to avoid the main lines, basically. Knight e5, and now he just wants to avoid these lines. So he should have gone a6, but he went c6, and this turns out to be a fatal error. Don't push the c-pawn too early in Crazyhouse, basically. And Bugzilla capitalizes. He's going to try and capitalize on those dark squares. Queen c7, hitting g2. Queen b6 is a good move. He realizes if he just does something like this, then takes, this is very unpleasant. So queen b6 gets the queen out the way of that diagonal. Bishop e7, takes. Knight at c7, takes, bishop at c5. A good move, keeping the attack going, says Opper. But also rook at c7 was interesting. Takes. Bishop here, check. Bishop here, takes. So, but opper says, yeah, he'd have been happy with this because everything's covered, he's okay. So bishop at c5 is actually a lot better. Takes, takes, queen takes, now rook at c7. He says, oops, I forgot about this idea. He was thinking of bishop at d6 as well. Takes, takes, takes. Ah, this is also good. Takes and at e5. King takes and queen keeps. The king is stuck in the middle of the board, and this is coming next, probably with checkmate. So rook at c7 comes, and it's only a matter of time before black is finished. Here he notices he can't take just like this because knight at d6, check, picks up the queen. So he tries to defend, but it's not working very well. And opper resigned. So good fight back from Bugzilla in game 4. Let's look at game 5. And it all came just from a minor error of playing c6, not a6. Game 5. So this time opper goes aggressive, going directly for c7. But Bugzilla knows what to do. Knight g4. He says knight h5 is also a move, but knight g4 is good. Queen takes, and the idea, of course, is if you take the queen, we have a fork, picking the queen up again. So bishop b4 check, at c3, castles. And opper says, I was not familiar with this line, but black got a nice lead in development. Apparently, he's got a nice advantage too. But it looks very uncomfortable because of this open d file. And he says, maybe I should just played knight f3, just developed, takes, takes, take. Okay, so you can't take, got to be careful actually. Yeah, you can't take with the pawn because this is checkmating you. And the reason it's mating you is you just keep on dropping diagonals. Drop, if the king were to take this and queen here is checkmate, so you have to, then you have to drop back, and this is checkmate. And all the other lines are basically mate as well. So you have to be really quite careful. So yeah, so black is doing rather well here. Maybe knight f3 is holding. At d2 was played. Bishop c5, d4. So opper trying to play quite actively, defending with the queen. Knight takes pawn. Tries to give up the queen. So why is he not taking here? Is because pawn e3 is uncomfortable. That's what he was thinking. So he tries to give up the queen. And we get a very sharp position. He's cleared away black's back rank, but also white's back rank is under fire. And already in this position, black has mate. And opper says he's quite surprised. Okay, sure, black has a lot in hand, but he's quite surprised black already has mate in this position. And the mate is rook at d1 check. And obviously if you take, we're just going to take, king takes, and queen at b1. If you just block like so, then we have a pawn in hand at c2, king e1, and rook at d1. So that's kind of easy. But if you do this, then same kind of idea, but now you have a rook defending. If you step up, it doesn't help you. Rook at d1 still mate. So this takes, it's not really helping though. Not helping at all. Black's got too much. Okay, so you can't take with the rook, but if you take with the king, then there's a nice thing. You can just draw that king up. Can't go back because rook here takes is checkmate. Sorry, not rook, queen in hand. But if you take with the queen, just put the queen on and put the pawn on and takes. Yeah, it's very tempting just to take here, and that would work, but even better is to take here, cut off the defense of the rook, and then go rook at d1. So already it was mate, but Bugzilla knows how to win these positions regardless. And yeah, he does draw the king out. He's got all of these pieces and finds the mate. Another painful loss, says Opper. That's after 5 games. He leads by 3 games to 2. Okay, game 6. Pushes d4, d5. Notice Opper's playing quite aggressively in these. And here I have a suggestion of my own here. So really this is quite creative opening position from both players. Bugzilla playing not playing book, and knight takes d5 was played. But what's rather interesting here is actually knight f6, and not rushing to take this pawn because it's actually very hard for white to defend the pawn. If you try and do moves like this, then you can just continue your development. But what probably most challenging is at e6 takes, and it looks like, you know, white is 2 pawns up, but white's development is a bit cranky. This is coming, this knight is unstable then, so you might try and defend, but that pawn now falls, this pawn will fall as well. Black actually has some nice activity, so it's unclear who's winning. So knight f6 is my interesting novelty for the day. But knight takes d5 was played, and then knight f6. Seems like a subtle difference, but actually white is slightly better here. Takes, takes, takes. And Opper says, at this point I'm thinking I'm doing well, but Bugzilla had some nice ideas with tricks on d6. It doesn't look like d6 is a weak square, but you will see. Attacks the queen, takes, 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 and he can't take back, because knight at d6. So we see a similar line. If bishop takes first, takes, 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 knight at d6 is the problem. If you just put a bishop on, take here, queen here, check. It's looking a bit tricky. And this is just looking at some of the lines. But okay. So what happened here? He can't take back is the point. So he has to sidestep. Now what? Rather strange move b4. It's a good move, but actually an even better move, it turned out, was at c6. That's an even stronger move. But b4 is a good move. Queen takes b4, bishop a3, very strange looking move. Looks like, okay, just give up another piece. Knight at b5. And I think black could have just taken all the material here. He could have just gone for it. Takes. If takes here, just simply king f8. White doesn't actually have enough for all the material. Knight takes a8. But okay, he backed off. We get this very strange. So obviously if he doesn't want this because of this, so just try to keep control of c7. And yeah, both sides are just having blind spots at this point. This knight is hanging, but both sides miss it. And now both sides miss the fact that queen at e7 is mate. So really rather strange game from both players here. And Opper now is trying desperately to defend with tricks, and with a sequence of checks and then coming back to defend the mate. But tricks aside, this is a really lost position and not really defendable. So after 6 games, Bugzilla has come from love 3 down to equalize at 3-3. So really good comeback. Game 7. No more knight b5, says Opper. He's going to play solid, not hyper aggressive, and we get a pleasant position. Yeah, so in this position, Opper says, yeah, Bugzilla really should have played f6. The idea of playing f6, mainly an open bishop e7, f6 should be played. It would be the principled move, and I was expecting that was the thing Bugzilla would definitely do. White has to play on the white squares after it, though. Yeah, white has to target e6. But f6 was not played. So with this, takes, and try and play on these squares. But instead, takes here, f4, f5, takes, queen's under attack, sidesteps. Actually, it's really interesting. He could have just gone straight for this. And you get a really interesting position. You can't afford to take that rook because the knight lands on e5. This is interesting, but you could just back off. Try and defend f7 by blocking with the knight, but you can go f7 anyway, then hit a knight and take here. And white's just got a good material edge here. I think it's a lot of pieces streaming in. Maybe add f7 to defend, but now black just doesn't have enough pieces in hand. And white's just going to be putting pieces on the board with attacks and winning quite easily, actually. So f takes g6 was very, very tempting in this position. But Opper sidestepped, takes here now, takes, and it's not such a clear position at all. Takes, and e7 seems like a really nice idea, picking up a queen or a very dangerous attack on the king. But there are a few resources black has. One of them, which is what played in the game, was bishop at e3. Bishop at e3 check, and then takes back. But bishop e3 check takes back actually gives white some counterplay, as we saw in the game. It turns out there's some even better ways of playing this, like at f2 directly. If you take then, well, check, you don't really want to take this bishop because pawn at g3, and then take back with all sorts of nasty ideas. Then you could hit the queen, but we can just back up, and black is very safe, whereas white is not. So another interesting approach, by the way, is simply taking this, and the queen is not the best piece on e7. You really want a pawn on e7. So then here check, knight here, and threatening to come in here with check. This is actually quite good for black. So giving up a whole queen for a pawn, but you have a massive attack coming. But okay, bishop at e3 was played, and white got quite a lot of activity. And this is actually quite hard to defend, just dumping the pawns. And he just gets in on the back rank, and he's got the queen if he ever wants it. But instead, he just goes for the queen. He could in this situation have just gone for mate, actually, with rook at h7. This is really pretty. Knight g8 check, forcing the king up. This square is covered. So forcing the king up, you take the knight with check, and this is checkmate. Or queen comes up as well. It's checkmate. But instead, he just took the queen, which is fair enough. And check, then gives up the queen, just draws that king up the board, and checkmates. So, actually what happened was, in this position, black resigned. So it was drawn up the board like this, and resigned, and he was contemplating bishop at f3, queen h5. King could come forward, and that's also checkmate. Okay, game 8, so Opper retakes the lead in the match, but every game counts in these sorts of series. And again, we have a more solid setup, and I think that benefits Opper playing a more solid style. Yeah, Opper says about this coming back here, this is a bug house system. White wants to be solid and then plays knight e5 going for trades, removing bishop g4, which is an attacker, and after trades white is the one attacking. Okay, so after bishop at d2, he says, now I've won a pawn. White wants to sack the queen, but I want to avoid complications after take c7. So after here, he doesn't want the complications of this, so he decides to defend. Bishop at e5, well now he decides let's go for that queen. Rook takes. Takes. And knight d2. Okay, so it's all looking good so far for white, for black, but maybe knight a7 was interesting here. Rook a8, and then if takes at f6. This would have been a very powerful attack from white, because you don't really want to take twice with the queen here. So knight's landing on g7 for one thing, and you can't take with the queen because this knight at d7 is coming, picking up your queen. So it's actually quite a good attack from white. But instead, this came directly and putting a knight on h5. But the problem is he gives black this pawn on e4, and oof. Critical. So black is doing fine until this move. So what's the problem with this move? The problem with this move is trying to remember what was wrong here. So oh, is white can just take here. Rook h1 doesn't work because this is just crazy. This is just crazy. You just say, look, you don't want to allow this, because if you go back, queen at g2 is mate. If you step up, queen at g4 is mate, right? But takes. Take it. What if pawn here? The point of pawn here, this is very important. You have to go king g3. So even if queen f3, you find safety on h4. And there's no piece that can check you. Or can check you nicely. So check, you take, and then you go, no, hang on. You don't take this. This is the point. So, takes, you do not take. The moment you take, you're finished, because pawn at g4 mates you. So the key was in this position, you actually go step up, and there's no queen at g4. g4 is not protected. So black can put a queen on g2, but he can't get his queen to g4, and he can't check the king on h4. So this is something Opper didn't realize during or even after the game. This whole sequence it's very important here for black to take this knight and then sidestep, because now if white were to just take here, well, now we have a knight in hand, so now things are very straightforward. You just have the classic smothered mate, or if this is taken, you have the classic queen or rook in the corner mate. And even if white is getting that take rook with check, you have another rook to take back, and white doesn't have the pieces to mate you with, and this mate is unstoppable. So going back to this original position, king d8 was a massive mistake. It was very important to take that knight and then go king to d8. Because white doesn't have time to take the rook. Okay, so instead, white does not take this rook. White is scared of this mating attack and takes the bishop. But now, black is back in control. Check, takes. Rook takes is also fine, but this is also good. Check, takes here, takes. And white just doesn't have enough. It's just desperate. White is like a pawn short actually from having enough. Just a pawn extra would be enough to get a back rank mate. Pawn here would be enough. Rook here, king here, rook here, checkmate. But no pawn, no mate. And at g2, white resigned. Of course, queen at h3 would have been even nicer. Pawn here and knight here, checkmate. But the point of pawn there is takes, bishop there, knight here, queen here, and knight takes pawn, checkmate. So Opper took the game, took game 8, and so a good fight back from Opper, winning the last 2 games, taking his lead to 5 games to 3. I think, yeah, I think so. Game 9. Game 9, we got another London, and everything going for c7. When that fails, everything going for f6. Really, again, fairly aggressive play from Opper, just going in there for it. Bishop at c6, quite a nice move. He said normally at h6 would be normal, but he was trying to be more creative. Just taking the rook was apparently good, but again, Opper getting very aggressive this game, and Bugzilla not defending accurately. So takes would have been more accurate defense. Okay, so he's going to taking the defender, which is a great idea, but this would have been a good intermezzo move, then take the defender. So we'll see this idea come up again. So at f3, so why not rook takes? If rook takes, queen takes, knight h5, white is doing quite nicely. So at f3 is a nice idea, but because of this idea, as happened in the game, it actually shows that bishop at f3 would have been much more annoying, because then you can't do this takes, knight h5 business, because the bishop would simply take on h5. So a very subtle point. Takes, knight h5, queen g7, so white is doing quite nicely. So queen g7 was an interesting move. So he's threatening mate, and when white takes the queen,
He says now black has a friend on g7, as JannLee likes to say. The knight is really not helping speed up white's attack. F takes g2. Meanwhile, very uncomfortable position. Threatening mates here. So knight h6, check. Now actually it turns out white does have a mate, but he has to go in for it. Queen at g8, takes, king takes knight. Queen, the key move. Queen coming in. This is the key move. Bring the queen into the game. Blocks. Oh yes. So if you just block, say at g6, the point is bishop at h6, and the king is forced up, and then queen here is checkmate. So if you run, then you can just sack the queen, swing that knight back, defend your bishop with the rook, and push that king down. So if there, simply bishop here and take all the blockers. And if he takes the pawn, then bishop here check, bishop takes pawn is checkmate. This is too deep for me, says Opper. He didn't calculate this. But the key move is queen coming up, queen coming into the attack. Instead, queen at g3 was played, and this, it turns out, gives black an opportunity. But the key move for black is bishop at e4, threatening taking the rook and rook at h1 checkmate. And so white has to go f3, but then takes, knight takes, and you're winning a queen. You push the queen onto a square where you can hit him with the check and pick it up. So that's the idea. That's the idea that was missed. Bishop at e4. Instead, takes here, and white fixes his holes, and white is back in control. And we see at g2, white's really just fixing everything up. Pawn on g2 is very nice. Knight takes e6. Opper says it might look crazy to sack, but I don't mind it so much, especially since I was afraid of rook takes g3 ideas. I didn't see f takes g3. I was confident that this is gg though. Takes. Desperate defense. Queen at g7. From black, just simply takes it. Surely too much material. And here the point is he wants knight takes rook, and there are no checks on the white king. So both players trying to defend themselves with the opponent's pieces. But rook takes g3 was played instead. Bishop takes g3, queen on the back rank, and now Opper finally goes in for the kill. Takes, and the queen in hand is checkmate. So yeah, both players really wanting to use the opponent's knights to defend them, but Opper winning out. So with that, he took his lead to 6 games to 3, I think. Yep. And we go into game 10. Bugzilla has the white pieces in game 10. Opper is black. And we have another. Okay, we now have a d4, d5. Effectively. And this time, Bugzilla uses a bishop to defend the weaknesses instead of the queen. And bishop takes e2, queen takes bishop at h5, f3, and Opper says I'll leave my knight here because a pawn on e4 can be useful. But hang on, sorry, I didn't mean that, because obviously this is pinned. He rather meant that he decided to take here. He knew that white would get a pawn on e5, but he thought he could weather the storm. But so nice little tactic here, but it says it boomeranged back at him. He thought, look, I'm going to take here, hitting the queen and the rook, and if he takes back, I take his bishop. And what he didn't realize is this bishop turns into a monster. Strong bishop on c3, pawn at e5 covers f6, and suddenly white's doing very well, and he's regretting he obviously says taking on f3 is suicide. So he shows the line. If you take on f6, knight e7 check here, simply takes back, and pawn at h6. And how to defend against at g7 mate ideas. So, very uncomfortable position for black. He wants to avoid that. So that's why he just sidesteps, which is wise. Takes. The queen is getting trapped. White's just doing anything he can just to pick up an extra pawn. And opper also gives a huge long line here. Instead of bishop at g4, there was a huge long line of knight at f6 directly. Takes here. Sort of ideas. So that's one idea, or backing up. If not, instead of queen takes d3, bishop h6, trying to go directly for an attack to open g7, then taking. Then white's doing quite well if you get him to open. So you don't open, maybe just go queen takes e2 directly, then bishop takes g7. Very unclear what's going on here, to be honest. All I know is you don't want to step back because that's checkmate, so you have to step up. Apparently white's doing well here as well. But white got a safe king and initiative, but black has all the material. So, okay, very unclear. If people want to check out the study, I'm going to put that in the with the stream and with the video when I post it to YouTube as well. Okay, so what happened in the game was, well, there's another whole thing about rook b1 was a brilliant move that opper missed, because you can't take that rook because at f2 is basically mating. So that's there's a whole kind of, but even if you don't take it, yeah, so this is a whole really interesting line. You could try and counterattack, maybe defend f2. Anyway, it's really unclear. Maybe it's a drawing line, maybe it's a winning line. It's unclear. It's a really complicated position. But what happened in the game is rook c8, takes, bishop at g3, and now black has mate. Oh yes, oh my goodness. So what white should have played here was bishop to g3, bishop at g3, and white suddenly has mate. Knight at h3, king h1. And you don't want to take on g2 as happened in the game because the queen can take back. You interfere first, knight at f2, and then you take on g2. How long did opper have? 6 seconds to see this. So not enough time. Just playing moves too quickly. Then take here, then take it, and this is the key point. You win this bishop with check, and then you go bishop here, check. And you think, well, why can't I step back? I've got 2 rooks in hand, so I can use one rook to draw him to the side, and the other rook to deliver mate. That's the problem. So he has to step up, but now queen takes pawn is checkmate. Rook here, check. Queen takes queen, check. Queen here, checkmate. So knight f2 was the move missed. There were other good moves as well. At f2, same idea. Rook at b1 is still an interesting idea in this position, and is still very strong. But bishop takes g2 is a big mistake from opper at the end of this game. I think tiredness coming in, and white cleaned up, stays safe, and gets the mate. So, interesting set of games. Just to say, if you just go bishop to g3 in this position instead of bishop at g3, then with this whole sequence, takes, knight here, you can try throwing your knight aside, clearance, king comes up, king is safe, king can run. It's such a difference, the fact that it's not a bishop on h3 defending, so you don't have queen takes, rook here, and so on. So here, there's nothing. White is safe. So such a subtle difference. And of course the knight can't be taken because of rook at h1, king f2, rook at g2, king e1, wins a queen with check. You better take it. At f3, I guess. You don't want to run because then you're losing the rook with check. So you probably, well, maybe you do it anyway, but this is a problem. Yeah, it's just all over. So difficult. If you take here, then queen here is checkmate, isn't it? No, queen here rather, and here is checkmate. You want to avoid this one. Hi there, F Gala. Yeah, glad you enjoyed. I have one other match I could show you, mariorton against doganswer. Because again, this was played right in the middle of the night, like this stream, and no one got to see it live. So hopefully people get to see this stream. We're going to look at it from doganswer's point of view. And we'll play through it quite quickly, maybe. So we're going to see a theme in these games of very safe kings and trying to attack these very safe kings, especially along these diagonals. F5, just trying to move your pieces up the board in a kind of, you know, what's the flow of the game? The flow of the game is, oh, this is a nice idea. This is a nice idea from white. It's a nice idea from white, but black has his own ideas too. Bishop at e8. Yeah, so I thought I added commentary on this because there's a better move than bishop at e8. So I'm slightly confused why that's not in the study because I thought I discussed it. But okay, add e2 directly, it turns out, might be interesting, might be very strong here for black. Surprisingly, because if queen at e8, that looks scary because bishop takes rook is coming next, but apparently you can just run, and white doesn't have the right pieces to check now. So that's an interesting thing. Okay, so instead bishop at e8 was played, knight f4, takes. Well, okay, this is now, game is back on. Both players defending. These are really grinding games from both players. Queen at d2 looks reasonable. Takes. We've opened up this g2. It's not quite a weakness yet, but if you can deflect that knight, then g2 becomes a weakness. Oh, he just fills the hole. Gosh, these games are hard. Takes. King h1. And we don't even have a weakness on g2 because we need a knight, a second knight for h4. So we're going for the back rank again. Gosh, these games are hard. And this is the critical point of this game. Yeah, this is the critical point of this game. So this is the point of this game. Rook takes knight. Treble attack along the back rank. And if only black had a pawn, he'd just go queen here, check, pawn here, checkmate. But he doesn't have a pawn. He could go here, but just block. You don't even need to take it. In fact, you don't take it. If you take it, you lose. Queen here is checkmate. But simply block, and those white rooks can just power through. And there's no defense. I mean, if you just put a queen on, for example, the line would go rook takes f8, bishop takes f8, rook takes, king takes, and we have so many pieces here. We're going to finish this off. Queen here, check,
just to draw that king a little bit further. Rook c8 check, blocks, just take it, take, and checkmate, for example. So that's if you block like so. If you try and block with, say, defend this, that just doesn't work at all. You just takes, and now you have enough pieces to finish the job. So, yep. So rook, just simply going for your own attack was what mariorton missed here. Mariorton played too defensive, and he allows doganswer to fight back. And now it's mariorton who's in control. Just simply queen at e1 check, and if you block, takes, knight at d2 check, knight at g1 check. There are just too many pieces, basically. You can try and run, but knight at t2 check, king b1, rook at c1 check, king a2, and bishop at b3 check is checkmate, for example. We just about find the mate with the pieces we have in our hand. But doganswer played it a bit more safely, I guess. Just double threat. The point is the queen can't take because rook here is checkmate, so king here, and he wins the queen with check and finds the mate. So that was doganswer taking game 1 against mariorton. Game 2, we're going to see these very safe setups. So he wants queen takes h6. He's even have to sack a queen. Okay, we see this a lot, this doot, doot, and doot. And it's a really interesting maneuver, which I didn't see before this Crazyhouse World Championship, and then saw a lot in the candidates. He doesn't want, if you give up the queen, we're taking this as well, and this is falling next, so he has to take back. Queen moves out of the way. Trying to take the bishop or take this pawn. What is this? e4. e4 was not the smartest continuation. Knight 3 to e4 was actually really interesting, putting lots of pressure on here perhaps. And of course you can't take because queen takes d8. So for example, takes, and then just simply pawn here. It would be very pleasant for white. e4, now e4 turns out not to be good because of knight to d4, and then again another slight mistake, takes the pawn and takes the knight. That's the problem. So he's taking the knight, and that knight is landing on f3, and that's what happened. And so mariorton takes control of this game. He's now trying to open up the h file, and white will be toast if the h file opens. So doganswer tries to block the h file and goes for his own attack. Check, defend, but the problem is the diagonal is weak. And the really neat way of finishing this game would have been queen at h3, and if you block with the pawn, simply takes, bishop here check, rook here check, and let me get you a pawn for, let's get a pawn for here, check. So you try and defend, but then we'll get a pawn for here instead. So okay, it's not a very direct forcing sequence, but it's something. Clearly winning for black, and if you block with the knight, then you can simply take, knight here check, knight takes pawn check, knight here check. Oh, I think I'll take the bishop actually, and very painful position. If we back up to here, for example, what's the continuation? It suggests just taking your pawn and chilling. I was wondering, is this even a thing? Takes. If you take rook f2 is the problem. You can't go up now because rook here is checkmate. So you might come here, but then this is checkmate. Okay, so anyway, queen at h3 is good, but instead he used his existing queen to threaten queen h3. At d7 was played, queen h3 came, and he just picks up another piece. But now that's a very important piece, because you have something called the OK mate. If you go knight takes pawn, if you step back here, you have the two knights, which make a kind of OK kind of symbol. And if you step up, then you have the two knights forming a knight cube. I like that one as well. And that's what happened in the game. King h4, knight f5, checkmate. So, powerful game from mariorton. He gets the two knights, making the checkmate a lot easier. Game 3. We see again just this standard little maneuver. If both sides are playing slowly, there's time for it, I guess. The really nice move in this position is actually this. The knight can't come here because the queen takes it. Can't come here because the knight takes it. Can't come here because you take, knight here check, and then take here. And this is just painful for white. So he'd have to drop back to d1, in which case you just slowly develop. You could play h6, for example. Why would you not play d5? d5. Apparently d5 is not so strong. Yes, because it opens up this square as the point. So the point is just to play solid moves that give white absolutely no ideas. So h6 to start with, and the idea next is actually to go g5, bishop takes h3, and g4, and you still have another pawn in hand, this pawn you just taken on h3. So d4 was a very strong move, but instead knight d4 is also pretty decent. Then he takes here and plays this idea, pressure on h3, and again, knight takes is really good. But wasn't played. Knight g4, and this time knight takes f2 is actually a very nice idea, but there's also this move. The threat simply to go with your knight to f2, and if you try and defend, just rook d8. Very painful for white. But okay, for some reason he declined the trade, and white manages to block up that h-file. So black's task is a lot more difficult now. Queen is under attack, and he just takes the queen, basically, and blocks off the dangerous lines. And the move here was actually to switch from dark squares to light squares at g4. If you take, it's actually got queen takes. No, not queen takes knight. But, sorry, if you take, you have queen takes. Queen takes with queen at h3 threat coming next. And if you do this, then takes. You can still do this, apparently. Yeah. And at g4 is going to hurt. So, yeah, that's a slight problem, if that's going to hurt. So at g4 is the move. If takes. Again, we're just trying to break through on h3. Yeah, so here we have this queen takes here move, but maybe take back here first. Okay, so g4 was the move, but instead doganswer went for e3, and this is also pretty strong. Again, g5 This was actually an error. He should have gone at g5, because g5 allowed counterplay with knight f5, whereas at g5 and black is crushing. But now, little bit less clear. Suddenly, things are not so clear. The black queen gets trapped, and the game turns. Black is trying everything he can, but white's just got checkmate here, and if black had a pawn, he'd have checkmate, but black doesn't have a pawn, and white's calculated it accurately. So, just a subtle thing here. g5 just suddenly gives white a slimmer of a chance, and he's threatening mate. You have to block it, and he gets his queen trapped, and things change, and suddenly white is the one winning. Black runs out of juice. There's no way of defending the mates. So you could do this, but this queen here is still checkmate. Okay, or you could do knight f6, but then you just take it. And there's no way of defending. King g8. Well, it's overkill, but why not? But black just resigned. In fact, black ran out of time. So mariorton at this stage was actually 2 games to 1 up. So dog answer. We see this again. Oh, okay, this is a huge mistake. Just hanging your central pawn. Bad mistake. And yeah, this is just a collapse. It really doesn't even matter if you lose your queen. You've got no time to take the queen because this is checkmate. So a real collapse here from mariorton. You lose your central pawn, you lose this whole huge attack. He picks up the queen with check, and it's checkmate. Okay, black resigned. A little bit of a disaster there from mariorton in game 4. So it's 2 games all, and we have the same sort of pattern from both players. This is very... looks like a draw offer. I mean, he didn't have to. He could always have done this, pick up an extra pawn. So it wasn't really a draw offer. But mariorton going for this, so the double attack. Not sure how good it is, but interesting. So he doesn't want to take the queen because bishop takes, threatening mate here, and he's feeling uncomfortable. So he goes knight at h4. White does have a good move here, and apparently it's bishop at h6. Yeah, he doesn't want to take here because takes back, knight here, bishop takes rook, rook takes. Maybe you're still fine, but bishop at h6 is the really strong move here. Because what can we do? I mean, if we just did a nothing move, the point is then we can take the queen and we're threatening mate. So we can't do nothing. But black doesn't really have bishop h6. What can he do instead? He could go, if he tries to put a bishop to defend, the problem is bishop f8, king takes, bishop h6 can come again even, bishop at g7, then you only have queens to block with. You get to trade a queen for a rook. So that's rather uncomfortable. Okay, so I'm not sure exactly how this will continue, but so we have at least a draw potentially. How are we going to continue this position? Bishop takes, bishop takes. Knight at g6 check may be an idea. Okay, I'm not sure how to continue this. Knight at g6. If you take with the h pawn, rook takes g8. Not sure what difference it makes. Okay, so I'm not sure. Queen at e8, bishop here. So if you block the rook, you're getting mated, is the point, because bishop and queen takes rook, rook at g8 is mate. So we'll block with something else. But okay, this is obviously just not very pleasant. King h8, and then then we'll just take that queen and threaten mate. Okay, so the whole point is bishop at h6 is a really strong move here, because then that queen is looking a bit silly. So we're threatening mate in 1 after taking the queen. So instead what happened was black put the bishop on h6. Okay, so black really sorts out his problems. Bishop at h1 turns out to be a mistake from white. White is still in this game with a very brilliant move. Bishop at g5. You just have to deflect that bishop from h6. Because then this is really strong. Threatening knight to g5 and queen h7 checkmate. And this will lead to checkmate soon enough. But okay, I'm going into far too much detail. There are lots of lines in the study if you want to check it out. The point is bishop at h1 is too passive and it's a mistake. Bishop at g5, deflecting this bishop is the move, with ideas of takes and takes. So bishop at h1 was a little bit too passive, and probably black's best move is just go queen at g7 and stay safe. But king h8, and white's best move is probably just to sack on here. But just to explain, if you just take here, take back, pawn here, these sorts of ideas. But okay, this is all very complicated. Again, the study if you want to see the full details. So rook b1 was played, and now black starts to press, and white resigned, or actually lost on time, but things are looking rough on the board. So doganswer taking control, 3 games to 2 after 5 games, and he would in fact take control of this match. So gets his queen into an active position, then just decides to back all the way off again. He's hitting f6, check, takes, and there's just no way to stop this mate, is there? Takes e5 was nice, but this is even nicer, because you have to take it, and now I have a rook for h8, and you're not stopping mate. But takes e5 was also very nice. You're not. He still has the same idea of let's get a heavy. He gets the heavy, and there's no way to stop the mate. So doganswer really taking control of this match, 4 games to 2. And like I said, both players like to play this kind of system. Okay, well, that was, yeah, that was knight takes f2. Yeah, no, this is interesting actually. This whole position, takes, takes, here, takes, takes. Here, queen d3, knight takes h4 is natural, but apparently knight takes f2 is super interesting, because if you take back, you get a knight on f2 again. And yeah, this is just super interesting. And you can always take here later at some point, because that pawn is probably quite weak if you desperately need a pawn. But this was also nice. So the queen is, he wins the bishop simply for this. He's going to try and capture the rook, and and the king is going to be very weak along the back rank. So yeah, and it turns out black won on time, but obviously black is winning on the board. So going into game 8, I mean, it's pretty brutal. Just put your queen on h6, and apparently it's completely fine because you get such a nice attack on these dark squares. Now the double attack here and here picks up the queen. Just to say, what should black have done? He should probably have just taken that bishop and then blocked here. And if takes, just given up the queen. And he's not doing too badly, simply developing. And you can't really afford to take here. So, I mean, you can, but it's not the end of the world. But instead, this is actually looking quite bad for black, and a nice little finish. Very nice little finish here. King g7, bishop at h6, queen g7, really quite a beautiful little mate there. So white to play and mate in this position. Very nice with bishop at h6. If you step back, queen at g7, and if you take it, this queen at g5 if you step up. So you had to step back. No choice in the matter. And then puts the second bishop on and mates. Okay, so dog answers basically cruising in this match. Here, mariorton just didn't notice something. Why not just take this? If you take back, take back. If you take the, if black takes if black takes the queen, knight takes, and now suddenly the knight is defended. Not a problem. So he didn't notice he could just win a pawn here. So queen takes g4 happened. And in fact, the nice move here is actually d4, picking up a knight. So that to avoid this whole situation. If the knight comes out, we're going to trade knights, and black is quite happy. Maybe putting a knight on h3 perhaps. So knight d1 would be most likely, and then you can go queen g4. So just a subtle difference. But this happened in the game. Queen takes h5. Now again, very subtle difference, but bishop takes, keep that pawn defended. Knight takes just allows white to simply just take this pawn, which black should not allow. But white did not take the pawn, and so black ended up being quite happy in the end. Hitting the queen. Hitting the queen again. Oh. Oh, mariorton is winning this one as white. Okay. So yeah, so what goes wrong here? Because obviously yeah, so I forgot the critical point when things sort of switched over. Well, white is very safe is the problem, and black is not. And yeah, so mariorton finds a nice checkmate, but he's safe the whole game. Maybe this point here, knight d7 is not the way to continue. From black, needs to play more actively, like queen at e2. But still, this is hitting the bishop, hitting this square here. Knight takes knight, queen takes bishop. Okay, so the game continues. It's unclear. but white might maybe still doing okay here. Yeah, obviously white would have been doing even better if he'd just taken the 3 pawns. So mariorton does fight back, but doganswer has the last word, and indeed took this match, winning the last game also. So he wins a pawn here, sacks his queen, and mariorton just had to find moves like rook takes e3 in this position, which puts him in control. Because if you take the bishop, there's queen takes f3. Oh, it's just absolutely crushing. And f2 to finish. And the point is you can't take on f2 because knight at g4 is coming. And if you try and sidestep, that's not really any good either, because you're losing. If you take with the pawn first, it makes no difference. Again, if rook takes, pawn at f2 is coming. If you try and defend with the queen, check, takes, and this is just utter carnage. So rook takes e3 was the move missed. Instead, this was played, not taking. And all this time, rook takes e3. Instead, bishop at g4 was played, and now white gets a chance to fight back. He gets something in on e6, and he's threatening queen at g8, checkmate. He's trying to dislodge that knight, and black crumbles. So that was it. That was doganswer taking down mariorton. Now there is another match. There is another match I'd like to, another series of matches I'd like to go over with you, but I really don't have time. So I'll just say there was one other match which wasn't covered live, which was Catask against mariorton. And this was one of 6 matches during the whole Crazyhouse World Championships in 2021, in which Catask won 10-0 against his opponents. In fact, he won every single double elimination match without dropping a game, and in the candidates he beat 5 players without dropping a game, and there was a sequence also of 14 games in the grand final against Jasugi99 in which he did not drop a game, which in total makes 64 adoption games without reply, games of 10 sequences of 10 or more without reply, in which he made in this match. Well, this will be for another day, I guess, to show you these games, but let me show you at least the games with mariorton, because they weren't covered live, and all of the other ones were covered live at some stage. So let's just quickly show you some of these games. And this is a different study, which I'll just paste in the study in the chat, and it'll be also up on YouTube. Okay, so we see this a sack on h3, and he's not quite happy to sack his queen and goes straight in. And white is actually fine here. Still, if you just look at the engine, it's not doing too badly. White is still not lost, but it's difficult to defend. And we'll see his opponents did crumble under the attack. What's the critical point? Well, the critical point is c3, I would argue. If you just take here, he's afraid, obviously Black is afraid of this, which back off. Takes here. Maybe unclear, I'll say, is the position. But after c3, Black is getting a pawn, can just dump that pawn on g4, and suddenly he's breaking through. And yeah, very nicely done. Now what does he do? Just puts pressure on the pins,
Notice he can't take on h3, because otherwise the knight comes in. Then he takes here. Then he takes the queen with check, and then checkmate. So that, he can't do that. So mariorton sidesteps. But it's too late. Picks up another pawn. Bishop takes f3. Drops the pawn with check. Picking up the queen next with check. White resigns. Game 1 down. 9 to go. d4. Mariorton, very safe player. Sets up a very safe king. And what does Catask do? Breaks in. Interestingly, I thought knight takes f8, but okay, just backs off. Knight takes f8 is probably good though. Knight takes f8, queen takes, and simply knight h4, hitting g6. Probably quite good. But he just backs off knight h4 first. Takes here, puts another knight on h4. There's a big weakness on g6 and how he's just cemented that in place. And that's going to be crushing. So, actually a quite... loses his knight, which seemed maybe unnecessary. But fine. I was thinking takes here, but then you lose control on g6 if the queen's on g7. So that's his reason for that. So... yeah, and also you can't afford to do this. Because this, and then takes, bishop takes f7. So he knows what he's doing. Takes back, bishop h7, rook at g8. Oh, he's picking up the queen. Very nice, threatening mate. Queen to h7. Bishop takes, queen, the other queen comes in. Okay, and black resigned at this stage. But the reason is because this is coming, this is coming, this is coming. It's checkmate. 2 games down, 8 to go. Okay, what do we have? Safe setup from both players. Very safe setup from white. How are you going to break this down? Well, this is how Catask is going to break it down. h5. Knight f5. Hit the queen. Queen d6. How are we breaking this down? White seems so safe. Take control of the center. King h7. Rook h8. King g8. Such a slow approach. h4, takes, knight back to f6. Bishop on g3. White's got so many holes in his position that have suddenly been created. Takes. It's going to take a while, but there's so many holes that have been created. It's uncomfortable. Rook at f2. I have to say, good job. Good job, mariorton, lasting for so many moves. And we get the double checkmate after 51 moves. Yeah, good job lasting so many moves, but oh my goodness, it was just lethal. And too easy. It was a lot of moves, but he knew exactly what he was doing. And there was no point when mariorton was ever in that game. Okay, so he sacks his knight for a pawn. What's the idea? It's actually to go rook on e6, apparently. And then takes at g7. And we have another pawn for h7 if necessary. So at h7 is coming, but you can even take on here first. So it's a very interesting. So queen e7 to try and keep things safe. Takes the knight, check. This is a problem because knight is landing on which is the problem actually? Is it knight at c6 is a problem, or rook here is a problem, or even bishop here is the problem? Bishop here because you can't take it because rook here will come next. So bishop, yeah, rook at d8 is now the problem. And if pawn takes knight, that's no good. Rook d8 comes. And you can take it, but then we take again. Queen takes. bishop takes. And this is the problem is Catask king is always so safe. So mariorton gives up the queen, and the problem is this square is too weak, and game is over. b6 and checkmate. Okay, 4 games down, 6 to go. Mariorton is such a safe setup, but he doesn't. Okay, so how do we break this thing down? Because this knight on g1 is just defending everything. So that seems to be giving up a piece for a pawn. He wins back the piece, but at a price. And the price is that black's king is actually very safe. And here you might think maybe to back off the queen, but you see, yeah, white is still in this. He obviously does not want to take this queen, because otherwise suddenly black is actually doing quite well again. He hasn't got any decent blockers. And he doesn't want to push this, or a knight would... Well, why doesn't he want to push f3? If he pushes f3... Yeah, that's the problem. He takes h6 and e3 becomes weak. So knight here is perfectly decent. Just gives up the queen for the knight and takes here. And Catask king is fortress king. But actually mariorton's doing rather well this game. How his king is... Catask king is safe, but he hasn't got that many pieces. Well, he does, but they're all squashed up into a corner of the board. Okay, he's winning some pawns though. And with those pawns he's going to make his way into the board. So after 59 moves, white resigns. He sees the writing on the wall. White only has pawns in hand. And look at this black king. Gosh, how do I break through? 5 games down, 5 to go. How to grind down mariorton is the nature of this beast. Putting the rooks on the G file and the F file and the H and king on H1. He's even happy to give up the rook on F3. And white doesn't... He doesn't take it because he's afraid of this. Just, yeah. It's not uncomfortable. So takes. Trying to deflect the queen, because then he gets this one. Mariorton sacks the queen. And he's going for the smother, obviously. Takes the knight. Okay, I'll take your knight. Backs off. Takes the rook. Now knight here is a smother threat. You can see smother on his eyes here. If he takes, knight here is a smother. Rook takes, queen takes, rook here. Takes, knight to smother. Threat. Check, check. Bishop here. It's too much. Pin. Just pin. Pin. Check. Check. And mariorton, what defense? What defense? I mean, really. But knight does get the checkmate. Yeah. 6 games down, 4 to go. Oh, does not want the queen trade. Then does want the queen trade on his terms. He likes to put his pawn on h5. Backing off.
What's the idea? Okay. He gets his teeth in, and that is bad news. He's looking at f2. Takes. Trying again for f2. Bishop takes. Oof. He wins the queen for a piece. Instead of queen at g4 though, he had something nice. Queen at h3. He has two queens in hand. Bishop here and queen here is checkmate. So a little bit of a missed opportunity. And he's just in this grinding mode and missed the fact that he had a direct mate. But okay, he just grinds his way, wins a knight, wins a rook, and he eventually gets the mate. Block is coming, takes, king here is coming, and pawn here checkmate. Or something. Bishop f2, rook takes. King g4 at h5. Or king e4 and knight g3. 7 games down, 3 to go. Okay, looks like black is doing actually quite well here. mariorton doing well here. Takes. Knight e2 check. Moves his rook to safety. So what went wrong? So that turned out to be too aggressive. Bishop at g3. Otherwise, things were going pretty decently. Just bishop takes f8 also is pretty strong. If rook takes, then at e7. And if bishop takes, then the problem is knight takes pawn is coming. With queen at h7 checkmate. So it's already game over here. But knight e7 was not the cleanest. But bishop h4, white wins on time. The point is, if knight h5, knight here is coming. There's a lot of pressure on f6. Difficult to defend. Maybe f5? No, just take it. Okay, so the grind might have continued. 8 games down, 2 to go. Puts a knight on g3. Looks like white's doing a great job of defending everything. White looks amazingly safe. Oof, but a pin. Check, and he does break through, does he? Not quite. Castle's queenside. Yeah, black doing well though. H file's open and shut. And the grind begins. Takes away the key defender and white resigns after 40 plus moves. None of these games are short. mariorton really, but the problem is mariorton plays into Catask's comfort zone. So mariorton tries something different in game 10. And just goes straight for this. Rook's on the G file and F file, and looking for the pins. F3, bishop at C2, and I'd say this is the key point in game 10. And since it's the last game, let us savour it. E4. Interference to all those bishops. So he's threatening knight takes bishop. At D3 hitting the queen. Knight at F8 check. And the way the game finished was simply king takes H6, knight takes F5 checkmate. The way the game might have finished would have been takes back getting a queen is the nice thing to do, because you're threatening queen here, checkmate, but you're also threatening rook at h8, checkmate, and you can't defend everything. So that's the way to go. If you took to get a knight, then it's more complicated to find the mate. Bishop here and rook here is the threat. So pawn at h7 to try and defend. Bishop at g7, and now rook here is the threat. Knight at h8 to try and defend. Okay, so this is just kind of just playing around here. What would be? Knight e6, the rook at f8 is the threat. Knight at g6. Knight takes g6. Knight takes g6. Rook at f8 takes, but that's deflected the knight from e7. Oh, you can just take it, but then we're picking up the rook we need for checkmate. Okay, so this is just a kind of a fantasy line. So you could checkmate with all checks with knights. Well, it's not with all checks actually at all, but it's yeah. You could check with probably promoting to a knight, but the neat thing to do here is actually to promote to a queen, and the mate is unavoidable. But what happened in the game was, in fact, even more pretty, arguably. Knight takes bishop, checkmate. So there we go. That was the final game that wasn't covered live during the candidates, and now it is. So that completes the Crazyhouse candidates catch-up for 2021. Now it turns out Catask won, as well as against mariorton, against 4 other candidates, 10-0. And he also won 14 straight games at one stage against Jasugi99, and he went on to become the 2021 Crazyhouse World Champion. So massive congratulations to Catask, and have a wonderful Christmas, everyone. Good night.